Let's talk a little bit about encapsulating conditionals. If you remember back to our variable section, really what we're trying to communicate there is the power of good naming conventions. And we're trying to do something very similar here. And you probably remember that a lot of times we store them in variables, obviously. Here, it's more about storing pieces of logic into functions, very small ones that we're going to create. And in TypeScript, it's actually really nice. This isn't a TypeScript video, but we can start having these private methods so that we really can go and showcase that, hey, this is never actually supposed to be a public function, or at least used that way. But here in our encapsulating conditionals, what we're really looking at is, hey, this can get very ugly very quickly. My rule of thumb is pretty much anything larger than one conditional or one check in our conditional, I start to throw into some of these smaller methods. And if it's greater than 2, I definitely do it 100% of the time. Now, this is pretty small, but it's all about the demo purposes. So how about we actually make this a little bit more descriptive? Well, one potential way is to go ahead and do the variables that we have talked about. Another is actually to go and create a function. Now, you're going to have to make that distinction based on how much logic there is, how many checks there are. This is kind of small, so either one would work, but really, use your best judgment. Now, what are we checking here? Well, we're checking if a user is active and the user is the primary account holder. And so if that's true, what are we looking for? Well, we'll say create a method, say get is user primary active account, something like that. And it's going to take in a value of user, and really we're expecting a Boolean. And instead, I'll go ahead and copy this over, put this in a return statement, because the intent here, you can see the name is even rather long, right? So it's not a short name, it's not a small name. And of course, pass in our user. But now we have a descriptive function in our conditionals. And as this primary active account changes, perhaps we have a date check. We're now housing this in one location, and we can sort of break it out. You would even maybe consider doing something like this, where even within here, we start using some of the variable stuff, is primary account, which is probably not what you're going to do in a nested if with 2 checks, but here we can sort of take it one step further, even start combining some of these items. And another, const is active. And we go ahead and set that equal to this part. Well, a nice little line break here for readability. It's actually one fantastic lint setting that you can do for return statements to always have a line in front of them. I highly recommend you turn it on. Here we go. We have a little method that's going to go and be used to describe a different item. And you can kind of see how we can continue to expand upon this, but sort of abstracting it and encapsulating these conditional statements. So really, any of them greater than 2, I'd highly recommend that you do this. Okay, so let's just review real quick what we did here. We created a function, a descriptive function, to break down a piece of our logic in our nested conditionals. Conditionals being the if statement. We even used some of the variable naming that we discussed earlier on in the course to kind of make it even more descriptive. Now, as ES 2020 comes out, you're going to see this more and more as they've added private properties and private methods. And you're going to see more descriptive functions and using in the conditionals, because then you'll of their private access scope. Don't want to dive too much into that, but really just try to understand that the main intent here is to get the non-primary user. It's not to have a whole bunch of logic that has to do with the primary active account. We can break that out into its own private or personal function like this and house it and give it simply a descriptive name. That's really what we're trying to do here.